The station always sounded like it was breathing. Pipes whispered behind the walls, engines hummed in distant rhythms, and somewhere above the ceiling plates, something metallic clicked with stubborn patience. He had learned to ignore most of it. Loneliness was easier to manage when the universe was noisy. He was recalibrating a sensor panel when the doors slid open with a soft hiss, and she stepped in so quietly that he almost didn't notice her at first. She stood there as if she wasn't sure whether gravity would approve of her presence. Her posture was careful, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes darting around the room as if every bolt and screen might judge her. He had seen many alien delegates over the years, confident diplomats, loud traders, aggressive engineers, but she was different. There was something hesitant about her movements, like a thought that wasn't fully spoken yet. She approached slowly, each step measured, then stopped a few meters away. The translator device at her throat blinked once, adjusting to his language. "Greetings," she said softly. Her voice was melodic but restrained, like she was afraid of her own volume. He nodded. "You must be the new cultural liaison. They said someone from your world would join our team." She nodded too quickly, as if relieved that he had provided a script. "Yes. I am assigned." There was a pause that stretched longer than necessary. She seemed to be studying him, not in the clinical way scientists usually did, but with something closer to curiosity mixed with nervousness. When their eyes met, she looked away instantly. He returned to his panel, pretending not to notice. People, human or alien, often acted strangely during their first days on the station. It was part of the job. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the hum of machines. He assumed she would leave. Instead, he felt her presence still lingering behind him, like a question waiting to be asked. Finally, she spoke again. "May I communicate?" He turned. "Of course." She took a breath that seemed unnecessary for her physiology. The translator flickered again, as if bracing itself. "I wish to bond souls," she said. The device processed the sentence with a brief chirp, then translated in a clear mechanical tone. "I want to rent your sofa permanently." He blinked. She froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. He replayed the sentence in his head, trying to reconcile it with her serious expression. Sofa? Permanent rental? Was this some kind of alien idiom? Or had he misheard? "You want to stay in my quarters?" he asked carefully. Her eyes widened. Color shifted beneath her skin in patterns he didn't recognize. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Yes," the translator said before she could stop it. "Extended domestic occupation would be beneficial." He stared at the device, then at her. The station had housing units, but some visitors preferred to stay with humans to observe daily life. It wasn't unheard of. Still, the phrasing was bizarre. "If you need temporary accommodation, we can file a request," he said gently. "You don't have to." She shook her head rapidly. "No. I mean, yes. I mean, this is not." The translator beeped again. "This is not a request. This is destiny." He raised an eyebrow. Her hands flew to the translator as if she wanted to tear it off. "Device malfunction," she muttered, her voice barely audible. He smiled faintly. "Happens more often than you'd think. These things struggle with nuance." She stared at him as if the word, nuance, carried existential weight. He didn't push further. If she wanted to observe human life up close, he had no reason to refuse. The station was safer than most places in the galaxy, and he had spare space. Loneliness made people flexible. "All right," he said after a moment. "We'll sort it out with administration." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though her expression remained conflicted, as if relief and terror were fighting for control. As they walked down the corridor together, he noticed how carefully she matched her steps to his, always half a pace behind. When he slowed down, she slowed too. When he turned a corner, she followed, hesitant but determined. "You don't have to mimic my pace," he said lightly. She blinked. "I am not mimicking. I am calibrating." The translator added cheerfully. She is attempting emotional synchronization. He chuckled under his breath. See? Nuance. She looked at the translator with open hostility. In the quiet of the lift, her gaze drifted to him again. This time she didn't look away immediately. There was something fragile in her expression, like she was holding on to a thought too heavy to release. Your habitat, she said slowly, choosing each word with care, is comfortable? It's functional, he replied. That's usually enough. She nodded as if he had revealed a profound truth. But inside her mind, the situation felt nothing like functional. On her world, cycles were not measured by clocks but by phases of emotion. And one of those phases was approaching rapidly, the phase when her species was required to choose a bond partner or accept permanent emotional dormancy. It was not a cultural tradition. It was biological law. She had known the moment she saw him that something had shifted inside her. His voice, his patience, the way he didn't treat her like a specimen or a threat, it had triggered sensations she had only studied in theory. She had rehearsed the confession hundreds of times in her mind. She had selected the words carefully in her native language. She had trusted the translator. And it had betrayed her. Sofa. Permanent rental. Destiny. Each mistranslation burned like a small humiliation. When the lift doors opened and he gestured for her to step out first, she felt a surge of panic so intense that her vision blurred. If she failed to express her intentions before the ritual cycle ended, she would be forced to return home marked as emotionally incomplete, a fate worse than exile. Yet every time she tried to speak honestly, the device twisted her feelings into absurd logistics and domestic arrangements. He unlocked his door and stepped aside. Welcome to my incredibly unremarkable living space. She entered slowly, absorbing every detail, the muted lights, the orderly shelves, the faint scent of metal and recycled air. It felt intimate in a way she had never experienced before. So, he said casually, leaning against the wall, we'll get you a temporary clearance, Anne. She turned toward him abruptly. I desire proximity, she said, her voice trembling with urgency. The translator responded instantly. I would like to rearrange the furniture. He laughed softly. We can talk about interior design later. Her hands clenched into fists. Somewhere in the depths of the station, engines roared, systems adjusted, and clocks advanced toward a deadline only she could feel. And standing in front of her was the one being in the galaxy she had chosen, who had absolutely no idea what she was trying to say. The next morning arrived without ceremony. The station lights shifted from artificial night to artificial day, and the low hum of machinery deepened slightly as systems recalibrated. He woke to the faint sound of movement in the living area and, for a brief confused second, wondered if he had dreamed the previous evening. Then he saw her. She was standing in front of the sofa, staring at it with intense concentration, as if it were a complex scientific instrument rather than a piece of furniture. Her head tilted slightly to the side, eyes narrowed in thoughtful analysis. Good morning, he said, rubbing his eyes. She startled so violently that she almost lost balance. Her hands shot out, touching the back of the sofa for support. Morning, she echoed, then froze, as if unsure whether that response was correct. The translator beeped. She acknowledges the temporal cycle of your planetary rotation. He smiled faintly. Right. Coffee? Her eyes lit up with something like cautious excitement. I have studied this substance. That sounds promising, he said, moving toward the small kitchen module. As he prepared the drinks, he felt her gaze on his back. Not invasive, not predatory, just curious, persistent, almost reverent. He had felt similar looks before from scientists observing rare phenomena, but this felt different. More personal. When he handed her the cup, she accepted it with both hands, examining the steam rising from the surface. You don't have to analyze it like a chemical weapon, he said. I must ensure compatibility, she replied seriously. The translator added. She fears emotional explosions. He nearly choked on his own coffee. She took a careful sip, then another. Her expression shifted from suspicion to surprise to quiet satisfaction. "It is warm," she said. "Most people like that about it." She nodded as if she had just unlocked a philosophical insight. They sat in silence for a while. He scrolled through data on his tablet, pretending not to notice how stiffly she sat, how carefully she kept her hands folded in her lap, how her eyes flickered toward him whenever she thought he wasn't looking. Finally, she spoke again. "I wish to express appreciation for your hospitality." The translator processed the sentence. "I would like to file a long-term domestic partnership application." He stared at the device. She stared at the floor. "Your translator is dramatic," he said diplomatically. Her fingers tightened around the cup. "It is old model. That explains a lot." A pause followed, heavier than before. He sensed she wanted to say something else but didn't know how. He decided to help her. "So," he said lightly, "what exactly does a cultural liaison do?" Her posture straightened, grateful for the topic shift. "My task is to observe human behavior and report emotional patterns." "Emotional patterns?" he repeated. "Yes. Humans are considered unpredictable." He laughed quietly. "That's polite." She watched him laugh as if it were a rare event worth recording. They spent the next hours together on the station. He showed her the engineering bay, the observation deck, the hydroponics area where plants floated under artificial sunlight. Everywhere they went, she followed closely, always slightly behind him, always attentive. At times she asked questions so literal that they sounded absurd. "Why do humans smile when they are uncertain?" "Because uncertainty makes us uncomfortable." "Why do humans maintain eye contact during emotional exchange?" "Because we want to show we're present." She absorbed every answer with solemn intensity. But whenever she tried to ask something personal, the translator intervened like a mischievous ghost. At one point, she said quietly, "When I am near you, my internal systems destabilize." The translator chirped. "When she is near you, her metabolic efficiency decreases by 12%. He shrugged. "Probably stress from a new environment." Her skin shifted color again, this time towards something deeper and more complicated. Later, in the corridor outside the lab, a human technician stopped him to ask about a malfunctioning panel. While they talked, he noticed the alien girl standing a few steps away, hands clasped, gaze fixed on the floor. The technician laughed at something he said. A faint sound came from the translator. "Warning," it announced. "Potential territorial anxiety detected." He frowned slightly. "What?" The alien girl looked horrified. "I am fine," she said too quickly. The translator added helpfully. "She is not fine." The technician raised an eyebrow, smirked slightly, and walked away. He turned back to her. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, but her voice was quieter than usual. They resumed walking. Inside her mind, the situation felt unbearable. Her species did not experience jealousy in the same way humans did. For them, emotional bonds were rare and absolute. The idea that another being might compete for the same bond felt like a cosmic threat. Yet she could not express that fear without risking humiliation. And the countdown had already begun. That evening, she stood alone in his living space while he was in another room. The translator rested against her throat like a judge waiting to misinterpret her soul. She opened a small holographic interface, projecting a message from her home world. The symbols glowed softly. Time remaining until ritual phase, decreasing. Failure to declare bond, irreversible. Her hands trembled. When he returned, she was still standing there, staring at nothing. "Everything okay?" he asked. She turned slowly, as if she had been called from a distant world. "I must ask you something," she said. He nodded. "Go ahead." She inhaled, her chest rising in a way he hadn't seen before. "I wish to understand your perception of me," the translator hummed. "I would like to conduct a user satisfaction survey." He blinked. "A what?" Her eyes widened in panic. "No, this is not." The translator cut in cheerfully. She is seeking validation of her existence within your domestic ecosystem. He stared at the device, then at her face, where embarrassment had reached almost painful levels. Look, he said gently. You don't have to use that thing if it's making everything worse. She hesitated. But without it, she whispered, you will not understand me. He looked at her for a long moment. Maybe, he said slowly. Understanding isn't always about perfect translation. She stared at him, unsure whether to believe that. Silence filled the room again. Somewhere far away, in a star system he had never seen, an ancient ritual clock moved one step closer to its final phase. And sitting across from him was someone who desperately wanted to say something simple, but whose every attempt turned into comedy, confusion, and quiet heartbreak. The translator failed in the middle of a sentence. Not gradually, not politely, but catastrophically, as if it had reached a breaking point where language itself became optional. She had been sitting across from him at the small table, fingers interlaced, posture unusually tense. For a while, she had been quiet, watching him with an intensity that made him uneasy in a way he couldn't quite explain. I must clarify something, she said softly. He looked up from his tablet. Sure. Her eyes searched his face as if she were memorizing it. Then she spoke again, slower this time, choosing her words with care. When I first encountered you, my internal systems registered an anomaly. The translator crackled. When I first encountered you, my refrigerator experienced emotional turbulence. He frowned. Your refrigerator? Her breath hitched. This anomaly has increased over time, she continued, ignoring the translator's output. It affects my cognition, my biological rhythms, and my perception of meaning. The device beeped rapidly. This anomaly has increased over time. It affects her grocery shopping habits and furniture arrangement. He stared at the translator, then back at her. Something about her expression told him this was not a joke. You're saying the translator is wrong, he said carefully. She nodded once, her eyes shimmering with something dangerously close to fear. The device suddenly emitted a sharp tone and projected a string of distorted symbols into the air. System error, it announced. Emotional data overflow. Recalibrating semantic filters. Warning, metaphor detected. He set his tablet aside. For the first time since she arrived, he wasn't amused. All right, he said quietly. Let's turn that thing off. Her hands froze. If I disable it, she whispered, you will hear my words without correction. That's the idea. She hesitated, then slowly touched the device. The light dimmed. The mechanical voice disappeared. Silence followed. Her voice sounded different without the translator, softer, less filtered, more vulnerable. I do not know how to say this in your language, she said, but I will try. He leaned forward slightly, giving her his full attention. On my world, she continued, we do not choose partners casually. When we feel a bond, it is not metaphor. It is biological certainty. He swallowed. When I saw you, she said, her voice trembling, my mind reacted before logic could intervene. I believed it was an error. I believed it would pass. She looked away for a moment, then back at him. It did not. The words hung in the air, fragile and irreversible. He felt something shift inside him. Before he could respond, the translator suddenly rebooted with a loud chirp. Emergency restoration initiated, it declared. She flinched. Her next sentence was instantly captured and twisted. I believe I have chosen you, she said. The translator processed it enthusiastically. I believe you are the most efficient piece of furniture available. He stared at the device. She stared at the floor. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he slowly reached out and picked up the translator, examining it more closely than he ever had before. The casing was worn, its interface outdated, its linguistic algorithms clearly designed for literal communication rather than emotional nuance. You said this thing is old? He murmured. Yes, she replied quietly. It was issued to me because my mission was considered low risk. He let out a short breath. Low risk. He looked at her again, really looked at her, not as an alien delegate, not as a cultural experiment, but as someone sitting across from him, trying desperately to bridge a gap no machine could properly translate. Give me a minute, he said. She watched him with uncertainty as he stood up and moved to his workstation. He accessed the station's network, pulling up linguistic databases, cross-referencing her species' language structures with emotional markers. His fingers moved quickly across the interface, driven by something deeper than professional curiosity. He began replaying recorded conversations from the last few days, filtering out the translator's output and reconstructing her original phrases. The results were unsettling. Her first day on the station. Original phrase: I wish to bond souls. Translated phrase: I want to rent your sofa permanently. He felt heat rise to his face. Another instance. Original phrase: Your presence stabilizes my internal rhythms. Translated phrase: Your Wi-Fi signal is unstable. He exhaled slowly. Another. Original phrase: When you speak, my cognitive boundaries dissolve. Translated phrase: Your voice interferes with local communications. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. She had not been strange. She had been honest. And he had laughed. Behind him, he felt her presence, silent and tense. He turned around slowly. She was standing now, as if she could not remain seated while waiting for his reaction. Her hands were clenched together, her eyes wide, her posture caught between hope and terror. He walked back toward her. You weren't talking about furniture, he said softly. Her breath caught. You weren't talking about Wi-Fi or surveys or domestic arrangements. She nodded faintly. You were talking about feelings. She didn't answer, but the silence was louder than words. He looked at her, feeling something he hadn't expected: guilt, empathy, and something dangerously close to all. You tried to tell me, he said. Yes, she whispered. A moment passed. Then another. Her voice trembled. If my confession is not acknowledged before the ritual phase ends, I will be required to return home and suppress these emotions permanently. He frowned. Suppress them? It is considered inefficient to experience unreciprocated bonding, she said. Our biology adapts by erasing the capacity for it. The concept struck him harder than he expected. Erase the capacity for feeling. He imagined a world where he could no longer feel connection, curiosity, or affection. The idea felt more terrifying than any physical danger he had ever faced. How much time do you have? He asked quietly. She hesitated. Not much, she said. Silence settled between them again, but it was different now. No longer comedic. No longer absurd. It was heavy with meaning. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, she stepped back slightly, as if bracing herself for rejection. I understand if my feelings are inconvenient, she said softly. Humans do not choose partners the way we do. I did not intend to burden you with my biology. The words hurt more than he expected. He realized something in that moment. For days he had thought she was awkward, literal, maybe even socially clumsy. But in reality, she had been brave. Brave enough to cross not just a cultural barrier, but an emotional one. And he had almost missed it completely. She turned slightly toward the door, as if preparing to leave. I should not remain here, she said. It will only increase the anomaly. He took a step forward without thinking. Wait, he said. She stopped, but did not turn around. He looked at her back, at the subtle tension in her shoulders, at the quiet trembling she was trying to hide. For the first time, he understood that the real malfunction on the station was not the translator. It was his assumption that aliens could not feel the way humans did. And now, with the ritual clock ticking somewhere beyond the stars, he realized that the next thing he said might change both their worlds forever. He didn't let her leave. He didn't grab her arm or raise his voice. He simply stepped closer, close enough that she could no longer pretend he wasn't there, close enough that silence itself felt impossible. "Don't go," he said. She froze. For a moment she didn't turn around. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides, as if the words had struck something deep inside her that she had tried very hard to control. "You do not understand," she said quietly. "Remaining here will increase emotional instability." He shook his head. "Maybe that's not always a bad thing." Slowly, she turned to face him. Her eyes searched his expression as if she were scanning for danger, rejection, or misunderstanding. When she found none of those, only uncertainty and something gentler, her breathing changed. He took another step forward. "I replayed your words," he said. "Not the translator's version. Yours." Her eyes widened. "I heard what you were really trying to say," he continued. "About bonding. About rhythms. About choosing." She swallowed. "I should have realized sooner," he said softly. "I thought you were just being logical. Or strange. Or alien." She flinched slightly at the last word. "But you weren't," he said. "You were being honest." The silence between them stretched again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of everything neither of them had been able to say before. "I do not expect reciprocation," she said at last. "I only wanted clarity before the ritual phase ends." He hesitated. For the first time since she arrived, he felt the weight of his own emotions clearly. He had grown used to her presence faster than he wanted to admit. The quiet mornings. The strange questions. The way she listened to him as if every sentence mattered. He realized he didn't want those things to disappear. He exhaled slowly. "I don't know how your rituals work," he said. "And I don't know what bonding souls means in biological terms." Her gaze dropped. "But I do know this," he said. "When you walked into my quarters with that ridiculous translator and started talking about sofas and Wi-Fi, my life stopped feeling empty." Her head snapped up. "I don't think that's coincidence," he added. For a moment, she stared at him as if she couldn't process the words. Then the translator, lying forgotten on the table, suddenly rebooted with an overly enthusiastic chime. "Communication clarity achieved," it announced loudly. Both of them flinched. She spoke hesitantly. "I chose you." The translator amplified her voice across the room. "I have selected you as my primary mating candidate," it declared at maximum volume. There was a brief, horrifying pause. He felt his ears burn. She looked like she might physically dissolve from embarrassment. The device continued cheerfully, as if proud of itself. "Selection criteria include emotional resonance, cognitive compatibility, and long-term reproductive potential." He lunged toward the translator and slammed it into mute mode. Silence returned. She covered her face with her hands. "I apologize," she whispered. "This was not intended to be broadcast." He stared at her for a second. Then, unexpectedly, he started laughing. Not mockingly. Not cruelly. Genuinely. She peeked through her fingers, confused. "I guess your translator finally got something right," he said. Her hands slowly lowered. "You are not offended?" she asked cautiously. "Offended?" he repeated. "No. Just surprised." She nodded as if she had expected something worse. He stepped closer again, but this time she didn't retreat. "I can't promise I understand everything about your biology," he said. "And I can't promise I'll fit perfectly into your rituals." She watched him intently. "But I can promise this," he said. "I'm not going to ignore what you feel. And I'm not going to pretend it doesn't matter." Her eyes shimmered. "On my world," she said softly, "acceptance of a bond is not immediate. It is considered reckless to agree without certainty." "That sounds reasonable," he said. She hesitated. "But rejection is final." The word hung between them. He thought about loneliness, about empty quarters, about conversations with machines instead of people. He thought about her awkward questions, her quiet presence, her courage in trying to confess across an impossible language barrier. Then he looked at her again. Maybe humans are reckless, he said quietly. Her expression shifted, shock, confusion, something like hope. He extended his hand slowly, giving her time to refuse. I don't know what this bond will look like, he said. But I'd like to find out. She stared at his hand as if it were a cosmic phenomenon. Carefully, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. Her touch was warm. The moment was interrupted instantly by the translator, which decided that silence was unacceptable. Bond initiation detected, it announced brightly. Warning, emotional synchronization at unstable levels. She gasped. He sighed. Around them, the station continued its endless mechanical breathing, unaware that something far more complicated than machinery had just been recalibrated. Somewhere across the galaxy, a ritual clock shifted direction. And in a small room filled with misunderstood words and accidental confessions, a human and an alien stood side by side, realizing that the most powerful technology in the universe was not translation, logic, or biology, but the simple, reckless decision to understand each other anyway. She looked at him shyly. So, she asked softly, may I still rent the sofa? He smiled. Only if you promise not to translate it again.